It's great to see you all here. I am very thankful that I am here, and I really enjoy meeting each one of you. Please come and talk to me at some point. I'd appreciate that. I want to hear your stories. That said, you're here to hear my story right now. And I'm going to be discussing deploying a site via code. Now, this is not the promoting content between environments talk where we're going to talk about creating content and development and promoting it to our other environments. Liferay doesn't do that. That session doesn't exist. You're not going to find it in the agenda. It just doesn't exist. This talk is not that either. This is deploying a site via code. So what am I talking about deploying a site via code? I'm talking about your first time site setup. Normally this is accompanying with a theme. So you're creating a site from a theme and you have some initial content that's going to go along with that. So first up the bat is the resource importer. This guy is deprecated. It is still supported in 7.2. It may be supported in 7.3 and beyond. I don't really know. It's all going to be up to the product management team to decide when it should come out. If I was doing new themes, new content that I needed to put into a site, I would not base it on resource importer. Resource importer is a format that's hierarchical in nature, and we'll see an example of it shortly. An XML file to control the import of resources. This fourth bullet is one that I have used. I have been successful transforming and converting from other systems into Liferay using resource importer. Because it's a hierarchical file structure, you can extract images, documents, content from another system, put it into the right format, put a resource importer wrapper around it, and import it into Liferay. So that's one way to use resource importer. It can be wrapped into a module, used with your theme, or separately as a module. It's great for one-time loads. I wanted to show, that's a little small. So I have a GitHub repo that is public, and I'll be sharing with everyone through the slides, but a repo that shows how to use resource importer. And I have in here a sample. Oh. So our resource importer format is hierarchical. There's a sitemap which defines your pages. There's a folder for journal articles, structures, templates, and the content itself, and another folder structure for documents. Your HTML is going to be in XML files. And they follow a very simple format, but not one that's clearly documented. Your best example is going to be the Liferay source itself to figure out how we're going to do the XML files for loading content. It's basically, though, HTML wrapped inside of an XML container. So the use cases for resource importer is going to be not if you're a developer in an organization, I would not recommend doing anything with resource importer. If you're inside of an organization, it's going to be much easier for you to create your site in dev, do a LAR export and import across your other environments for the first time load. And the reason that I say that is it's just going to be faster. You have control over your environment, so they're going to all be at the same version. They're all going to be in line with each other, so you're not going to run into common issues dealing with Resource Importer across different environment versions. However, if you're an SI, you don't have control over what the client is going to be doing in their environment. They may have a different version, they may have X, Y, or Z. So using Resource Importer or the next one, the Site Initializer, is going to be the way that you want to go to deliver initial content to a client. Conversion into Liferay is a use case that I like, and initial site setup. But since this is deprecated, we don't want to use it anymore. We do, however, want to look at the Site Initializers. Site Initializers are a replacement for Resource Importer. They have the functionality of Resource Importer, implemented slightly differently, but it can load your web content, your documents, your images, but it can also do a lot more. So the fragments in 7.2, you can load fragments, you can load content sets. All of the new goodies we have access to use in Site Initializers for loading content. It is not controlled by XML, it's controlled by code. We'll see an example of that shortly. There's no rigid directory structure that you have to follow. Since it's code-based, you can basically look for your resources anywhere. The problem with it right now is that it is not documented. The only source of information you're going to find on the Site Initializers is the Liferay source code itself. And I'll show you how to find that here in a second. It's basically these links to the Liferay example themes that we provide. Each one of those has a Site Initializer module that goes along with it. That can be an effective way to learn how to use Site Initializers. I know that our documentation team has this on the list to complete. I just don't know what the timeline is on its delivery. And as we'll see shortly, they are powerful, but they are complex. So let's take a look at one. We'll start here with the Ford theme. So the Ford theme is a theme that's available from the Liferay source. It's in GitHub, so you can access it. And it has an example of a Site Initializer for the Ford theme, also for Westeros Bank, and the other one, which I forget, Porygon. So it's a OSGI module, has the BND file for wrapping it in. And like I said, this one is code-based, so it is not based on an XML file. You're basically building an OSGI component, which the service it's going to implement is the Site Initializer. I can make this a little bigger. So it's the Site Initializer service that you're going to be implementing. This has a primary method that you're going to look for, which is the initialize method. This is the one that is going to be invoked by the framework to handle the site initialization. You're going to get the group ID. This is your site ID for the site that you're loading content for. The rest that you see in here are examples of some of the things that you can do within a site initializer. So in this case, we're updating a logo. We're updating the theme for the site. We're loading some fragments, loading some documents, setting up pages. So as you can see here, since it's code-based, it has access to the entire Liferay API. So you're not limited to just specifically content-related elements. You can also load other pieces through here, roles, categories, tags, all of those things that you need from an initial site perspective, you can load using a Site Initializer. But because it's code-based, there's a chance that you're going to have to work at developing and testing the module to get things right. And that can be challenging. We do provide a number of helpers that are going to go along with a lot of these pieces. So if we jump to, let's do the fragment. I can type. So the fragments, here we're just calling out to the fragment collection service. So even though we're doing something which is seemingly complex of loading fragments, because of the helpers and the services that we have that back all of these pieces, you have utilities that are going to help you get the job done. So it's not a complete code by hand sort of operation. So the use cases for Site Initializers are basically the same as the resource importer. If I'm a developer inside an organization, I think taking the time to learn how to use an undocumented Site Initializer to initialize a site with a theme or even separately, and deploy it and test that code and then set up my environments, I think it's way too much work. Inside an organization, it's just going to be easier for me to create the site in dev, export the LAR, import it across to the other environments. If you're an SI, though, you can benefit from the Site Initializer because this is something that you can pass off to a client that they can use to populate their environments. Conversion to Liferay is another option here, and initial site setup. Our next one is upgrade processes. I love upgrade processes, but I hate the name. Upgrade process kind of implies that you're doing an upgrade from one thing to another. And that's not really the contract. The contract is this thing is going to run once, and if it's successful, it's never going to run again at that version. So it's a contract that you can trust that when you do things, if from a site load initialization aspect, you can ensure that I want to add categories. I only need to add them once, so if I build them into an upgrade process, the categories are going to be added. And it's only going to happen on that one time when it's processed in the environment. From an upgrade perspective, if I need to add new categories later on, I can do another version. And that way, if I push this module to a new environment, it's going to run both upgrade processes. If I push it to an environment that has it already, but it's the older version, it's only going to invoke those processes that it needs to get up to the latest version. So to me, these things are very easy to use, and the promise of only running once in the environment is important to make sure that it's going to do what I need it to do to set up the environment. Because it's based in Liferay, it has full access to the Liferay API. Not so many of the helper interfaces are directly available here, but because all those helpers that we have for Site Initializers are themselves OSGI components, we can get access to those in our OSGI implementation of the upgrade process. There may be a need for manual permission checker setup. I've run into this a number of times. It often depends on the APIs in Liferay that you invoke. You're going to know if this is a problem as soon as you deploy it and you get permission checker error that you need a manual permission checker set up. I find it happens with expandos, creating expandos, but outside of that, that's been the only case that I've run into it recently. Upgrade processes are independent of sites and themes, so you can actually let your theme guy go off and do themes while you write upgrade processes to create content, so that can be useful. Since they're upgrade processes, you can do incremental site setup activities, like I explained earlier with the categories. So you have one set of categories for version 1.0, and as new categories need to be added to the environment that you're dependent on, that's 1.1, 1.2, and the upgrade process will take care of making sure that the appropriate ones get run in any environment you go to. They're entirely code-based, so it's, again, a development activity that you're going to have to test and work through. Simpler designs are easier to work with. And I have another GitHub repo, again, that's going to be available through the slides, that has an example environment setup that I did. Oh, open says me. So in this particular case, I have 3 different versions that I have coded into my module. Version 1.0 is, let's see what it's doing. Initial environment setup. Oh, I'm adding roles. So in this particular case, the only thing I needed to do in the environment was make sure that I had a role in the system of UI tester. So that's all this upgrade process has in this particular version. If I go back and I check one of the other versions, this one I'm loading a user group. I don't have to look at that, but I can look at 1.2. What's here? This is a user group role. So because this is an upgrade process, it's going to be run in order. So my role is going to be created first because that's 1.0.0. The user group is 1.1, and my final step of user group role is 1.2, so it would be the last one to run. And again, it's all code-based, so I have to look up the role, I have to look up the user group, but then I can take care of doing whatever initialization I need. So the use cases here, I use this a lot for in-house setup as well as for delivery as an SI because I find them very easy to use. They are fast to implement. They're not overly architected. I would recommend using separate processes, separate defined classes to do separate tasks rather than trying to, from a site initializer approach, have that one class initialize everything in the environment. I think it's easier to track and debug and test and whatnot. The last one is the scripting control panel. I think this is sometimes an undervalued tool that Liferay offers. The scripting control panel it's a control panel that's available to site administrators, but you can actually run Groovy Scripts in the control panel. And the Groovy Scripts have total access to the full set of the Liferay API. So from a site initialization perspective, you can write a Groovy script to create everything that we just saw in the upgrade process, everything in the site initializer, because at the end of the day, it's just Groovy code, which is effectively Java, but in a scripting template. And you can use that script to set up your environment. Why would you want to do something like this? It's a great way to do things in an environment without having to deploy anything. So if you have a rigid deployment process in your organization, a rigid test and SCM process that you need to follow, doing an actual module can sometimes be harder than just getting a script and going into the control panel and running it. So it's a valuable tool that I really encourage everyone to look into. Its problems is the editor itself is really stupid. It has no syntax highlighting. It has no code completion support. It doesn't know if there's compile errors in your script about missing classes or packages or whatnot. It's really a dumb editor. And that's, to me, the biggest complaint that I have with it. It's that hard to use. It doesn't save your scripts. So if you create them in an environment and you navigate away from the control panel and you come back, your script is gone. So you have to take extra care if you want to use them from an organized sense. You have to copy your scripts out and keep them in an external source so they're available to you later on. The user that it runs under is, of course, your current user. So there's no permission checker issues. So that's one benefit to it. You should always test your Groovy scripts in an environment that you don't care if things go sideways. You can write a Groovy script that says delete all of the users out of the system. because you're invoking Liferay APIs that have methods out there to delete the users. The Groovy Script control panel will allow you to run it, but you're going to destroy your environment in the process. So you always want to test your scripts in an environment you don't care if things go sideways, so that you have time to fix them before actually doing them in a production-like environment. For use cases, I would use it for ad hoc environment setup. When you want to avoid a deployment, as well as for quick and easy changes in environment. Oh, you forgot to create the role in production. Here's a Groovy script so the admin can make it. So it's a very easy way to push those kind of things out in a controlled fashion without having to tell your admin, click here, click here, click here. So conclusions. Resource importer is still there, so if you have used it in the past, it's still going to be there for you, at least in 7.2 and probably for 7.3 also. But I wouldn't use it necessarily for new development. Site initializers are more complex, but they're not documented. So you're going to be feeling your own way. If you have issues, post to the forums, post to the community Slack. Myself and others are out there, we can help. Upgrade processes work, but it's all on the developer. So as the developer, you're going to be testing and fixing bugs in your upgrade processes. It's just the nature of the game, but it's nothing that should be too scary. And the Groovy scripting control panel can be used without deployment, but your scripts require a lot of care. So my own opinion is, if I am, like I said, if I'm a developer in-house, I might use upgrade processes, I might use a Groovy script, but I'm not necessarily going to use Site Initializer or Resources Importer, like I said, because it's going to take more effort to develop and test and debug those than it will to just create your initial site in dev, export the LAR, and import it elsewhere. As an SI, as a consultant, those are going to be the times where I'm going to look towards Site Initializer, because it's something I can hand off to someone else where I don't have control over the environment. And the Site Initializer is going to work. It's going to be supported going forward. It covers all of the entity types that we worry about under 7.2 and beyond, where Resource Importer will not. So in those cases, I think learning how to use the Site Initializers are going to be important. I use upgrade processes a lot myself, not just for site initialization, but for other issues as well. Real upgrade processes for my database entities, changes to existing content, cleanup scripts. If I know I'm have an environment with some bad data, I'll do an upgrade process to take care of purging the data out there. That becomes something I can deploy, and I know it's going to work and do its thing. Otherwise, that's all I have, and I purposely left time for questions. So if you guys have some questions, I would love to hear them. Looks like we have a bunch. Where's my moderator? There he is.
Hi.
Hi.
Oh, really strange to speak in people here. I have a question about Groovy Scripts. Are there any plan to make it easier to develop Groovy Scripts? Like you said, this is just a text area on the admin, on the control panel.
No.
Great.
There's no plan. That said, yesterday in Unconference, I heard from a team that has a product for 6.2 called, oh, I'm going to butcher the name now, but it's Scripting Center, I think. It's in the marketplace. I, too, have been working on one for 7X. It's just not ready to go yet, but it's going to have some of those things in, and I plan on releasing it when it's done.
Okay.
But from a product perspective, no, I don't think there's any plans to make the scripting control panel more robust.
Okay, or it could be in the IDE, like make it easier to develop it in the IDE and then just copy paste it in the control panel. Another question about the site initializer. So I had the use case to initialize a new website with Liferay a few weeks ago, and I contacted the support about Site Initializer because I saw that resource importer was deprecated.
Yeah.
They told me, yeah, it's not deprecated. It will be used in the next years and it's not going away. What's going to happen?
It's this weird kind of state where some people know it is deprecated, but I don't know that you can find anywhere in the documentation that it's really deprecated. But Site Initializers is definitely the replacement for resources as importer. RI doesn't handle fragments at all. It doesn't handle any of the entities that we're talking about for 7.2 that you might have seen in any of the presentations today or tomorrow. So SI is definitely the replacement for RI, and RI, depending upon who you talk to, they're going to either see it as officially deprecated, unofficially deprecated, or maybe no word at all. But I would consider it done. I would not do anything new with resources importer if I had control over it.
And do you have any ETA about documentation?
No, unfortunately I don't. I know that the team is working on it. We focus on site initializers for all the themes that we provide as example, but also many of the themes that you will build for commerce sites will include site initializers. That's most of where the global services team has been using site initializers to help with setup for commerce sites. So even us within Liferay, we are using it, but it's not yet documented. I don't know what their ETA is. I know they have a lot of things that they're trying to get done. I just don't know when it's going to be.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
So one small question about Groovy Scripts. I've noticed that there's a maximum number of lines you can execute on the engine. So it just throws an error if you have too many lines of code. Is there any kind of documentation on those kinds of limitation, or is it trial and error?
I'm not aware of that limitation. If I had to guess, it's probably in the editor itself, but not necessarily in the script process. I would encourage you, if you're on DXP, to open a support ticket for it. Make sure that Liferay knows about it and it's reported in an official capacity so they do something about it. I'll go and try to find on my own what's going on there, and if you hit me up on Slack, I could have some more info for you.
Great, thank you.
You're welcome.
Hello.
Hi.
I have a question about the resources importer with theme. We have a theme and we use a resource importer to import structures for journal articles and templates for them, and also asset publisher templates. What's the case with the Site Initializer laser? Is there a way to import certain structures for the multiple different environments like test and integration servers, or should we just do the structures and template just to like test environment and then use the export import lar thing to the next step environment?
Okay, so there's two there. The first is loading structures and templates with your SI. That's absolutely supported. At the very least, because it has full access to the API, you can manually force the import of those things. But I'm confident that there is support for that in there, if only because Liferay sees Site Initializers as the replacement for resources importer. The other question was, should I use RI or even SI in each of the environments, or just load into one and export import into others. I would say if you have the resource importer and or the site initializer, use that as your deployment mechanism into the environments. Because at the end of the day, even though Lars will be a way to do it when you control the environment, I hate Lars. They're so fragile. I would not use them unless I absolutely had to. So I would encourage you to use the RI or the SI in the other environment since you have it already.
Okay, thanks.
Yep. We have 30 seconds.
Hello. I have another question. How is remote staging handled by the upgrade process or site initializers?
Remote staging is not handled by upgrade process. Upgrade process is going to be run in the environment. So in your remote staging, you have your remote staging environment where you're going to deploy your upgrade process. That's going to do its thing there. You're also going to deploy that module to your production environment because it's updating the database, doing what it has to over there. So that's kind of outside of the staging process. SI and RI, however, if you have a, let's see, well, that's on site creation. That's a good question, because if I am creating a new site, I would be trying to do remote staging for that site somewhere else so that I could do the creation of the site, but the creation of the site is tied to possibly the invocation of your theme and your site initializer. So if you had a blank site and you you set the Westeros theme in there, it would create the content. So in your remote staging environment, I would be willing to bet that when you load it in there and you publish, it should send all the changes for the site over to live. But it's an interesting question. I think we should test it out. Oh, now I'm in the hole. Sorry, guys. I ran a little bit over. Thank you for your attention. If I can help you in any way today, tomorrow, please feel free to stop me, ask your questions. I take all comers, and thank you.